The restaurant glowed with crystal chandeliers and polished silverware, where every flicker of candlelight seemed to whisper wealth. Conversation hovered like perfume, low, intentional, rehearsed. Plates clinked gently beneath soft jazz. Everything felt expensive, until a phone rang. It was brief, barely disruptive. She turned her back slightly and answered in Mandarin, voice hushed, tone respectful. It was a quick exchange, something about her sister's school. But as the syllables danced through the air, the atmosphere shifted. The man at table 4 raised an eyebrow. A manager leaned closer, his expression already souring. That night, he pulled her aside near the service station. "English only on the floor," he said, barely looking her in the eyes. The next morning, she was gone. No write-up, no warning, just a void where her name had been on the schedule. What they didn't know was that the man sitting across the room understood every word she said. That the so-called millionaire, just a guest, but the real power, silent, observing, had been listening the whole time. Before we reveal how a single phone call sparked a global reckoning, tell us where you're watching from, and follow for more stories where language, dignity, and truth speak louder than power. Danielle Thomas moved through the restaurant like a breath between moments, graceful, efficient, unseen unless needed. At 28, she wore the crisp white button-down and black apron with quiet pride, not because it defined her, but because it gave her just enough room to keep moving forward. By day, she was a part-time language tutor. By night, she served caviar and champagne to people who barely noticed her name tag. Fluent in 3 languages, including Mandarin, thanks to an aunt who raised her with Saturday cartoons in Chinese, Danielle never used her voice for show, only for connection, especially with her 10-year-old sister Mia, who waited at home with homework and sticky notes full of hope. The restaurant was all dark wood and velvet drapes, where power came with candlelight and silence was curated as carefully as the wine list. It was an upscale fusion concept in Manhattan, where diners spoke in mergers and gallery openings, and where every flick of a wrist or folded napkin had a protocol. Kendra, the floor manager, ruled it like a fortress, blonde, polished, and impossible to please. She wasn't cruel, just cold. She spoke in schedules and glared at smudges. For her, the image of the room mattered more than the warmth in it. Danielle, despite her fluency in 3 tongues and her ability to calm the most irate guest with a smile, was still, at best, a tool, at worst, a threat to control. Kendra resented her ease, her natural elegance, her subtle magnetism. That night, Junjiao sat at table 6, alone, slim black suit, no entourage. No one knew his name, and he preferred it that way. A billionaire tech investor with stakes in global AI infrastructure, Jun had made a career out of observing quietly before speaking. He noticed details others overlooked, like the way Danielle adjusted the position of his wine glass without touching the rim, the way she switched between English and Spanish to help a busboy behind the curtain, and then, most of all, how her tone changed when she took that call. Soft Mandarin, gentle cadence. Not boastful, just natural. The phone in her hand was older, a bit cracked on the corner, but it symbolized her lifeline, a call from Mia's school, a brief check-in. Her answer wasn't defiance. It was instinct. She lowered her voice, turned away from guests, and spoke as if her dignity was stitched into every syllable. But when the call ended, Kendra's eyes were already on her. The firing paper, delivered the next day with corporate language and legal brevity, held no explanation, just silence and ink. It was meant to erase her. What they didn't realize was that the phone was more than a device. It was a bridge. The Mandarin wasn't noise, it was pride. And the man in the corner booth, still sipping his wine, wasn't just another guest. He was the storm they didn't see coming. The call came just after the dinner rush, when the clatter of dishes had softened into murmurs, and the hum of conversation settled like velvet over the room. Danielle stood near the service bar, catching her breath between tables, when her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. Mia's school. Her heart skipped. Without hesitation, she answered, turning slightly away from the floor. "Wei, ni hao," she said softly into the receiver. Her tone was calm, instinctive. The conversation was brief, just Mia's teacher updating her on tomorrow's school project. Danielle smiled, thanked her, and ended the call in under 30 seconds. But 30 seconds was enough. A man at table 4, his cufflinks catching the candlelight, shifted in his seat. "We speak English here," he muttered with a curl of his lip, not loud, but just enough. His dining partner chuckled beneath his breath. Danielle heard it. So did the bartender. But no one said anything. That night, after the last dessert was served and tips were pooled, Kendra met Danielle near the locker room. Her arms were crossed, her tone icy. "You made people uncomfortable," she said without a preamble. Danielle blinked. "It was a quick call from my sister's school. She's 10. It was important." Kendra shook her head. "This isn't about the call. It's about image. Guests shouldn't feel excluded. Foreign languages, especially in front of high-profile clients, can be jarring." Danielle's words caught behind her teeth. She swallowed them. "So, I was unprofessional for answering my sister in my language?" Kendra didn't respond. Her silence was answer enough. The next day, Danielle arrived to find her schedule blank. Her locker was empty, her time card deactivated. No meeting, no conversation. Just a hollow space where her shifts used to be. She stood in the back hallway for a long moment, her hands at her sides, eyes locked on the list of names that no longer included hers. She didn't cry. She didn't storm out. She simply walked past the kitchen, past the linen closet, and out the back exit into the cold Manhattan morning. The city didn't pause for her loss. The traffic kept moving. The world spun on. But in the quiet booth at table 6, Junjiao sat with his tablet, still nursing last night's injustice. He had seen it all. The way she turned away to take the call, the subtle mockery from the guest, the shift in Kendra's body language afterward. And more importantly, he had understood every word Danielle said into the phone. What no one realized was that the silence Danielle left behind was already echoing in the ears of someone with the power to make the world stop and listen. The following afternoon, the city's most influential voices gathered beneath sweeping chandeliers at the East Coast Innovation Forum. An event lined with startup buzzwords and polished ambition. Cameras flashed, murmurs filled the high-ceilinged ballroom, and a panel of CEOs settled into their leather chairs on stage. Among them sat Junjiao, quiet, composed. His suit a simple navy that defied the flashier ties beside him. He wasn't the kind of man who fought for the microphone. But when it was passed to him, and the moderator asked about innovation in global communication, he leaned in with something more honest than expected. "I had dinner last night," Jun began, "at a very expensive restaurant in Manhattan." His voice was calm. "And I watched a woman, a waitress, answer her phone in perfect Mandarin. It was a personal call, brief and respectful. Her words were fluent, clearer than I've heard in most boardrooms. She spoke like it was part of her skin. Her pride." He paused, letting the silence settle. "She was fired the next morning." The room fell still. The moderator blinked. The other panelists shifted in their seats. "I won't say the name of the restaurant," Jun continued, "because they'll say this is about branding. But I will say this. If the future of business is global, then the future of respect must be multilingual." Someone clapped. Then another. And then the room erupted. Within hours, the clip was online. By the next morning, it had over 3 million views. The headline spread across Twitter. "Billionaire calls out restaurant for firing waitress who spoke Mandarin, calls it corporate racism." Yelp reviews for the restaurant plummeted. Former employees began commenting anonymously. "We were always told to tone down accents." "I saw a cook sent home for speaking Spanish." The media called. The restaurant released a statement full of cold neutrality, but the fire had already started. Danielle, meanwhile, sat on the couch in her apartment, her phone buzzing nonstop. Her sister stared wide-eyed at the screen as clips of June played on the news. Then came the email, a formal invitation, an offer. Jun Zhao was assembling a new division, Multilingual Outreach, for his global philanthropy initiative, connecting women and youth across underserved communities. He needed someone who understood language not just as words, but as power. He wanted her. When Danielle finally met him in person, it was in an office flooded with light, where books lined the shelves and nobody whispered behind curtains. Jun stood to greet her, offering a soft bow of the head. "You spoke," he said, "and they silenced you. But I heard you, not just your words, but your purpose. Would you consider helping me build something better?" She smiled, nervous but full. "I already know how," she said quietly. "I've been speaking that language my whole life." This time, no one told her to translate. No one told her to sit down. This time, the room waited for her to lead. Later that week, Danielle stood on the rooftop of Jun Zhao's Manhattan office. The city stretched behind her in streaks of steel and evening gold. She held a cup of tea in her hands, its steam curling upward like the words she still couldn't quite find. The offer had been generous, the position prestigious, but it wasn't the title that made her feel unsteady. It was the why. Why her? Why now? Jun approached quietly, his presence calm like always. He stood beside her, looking out at the skyline, hands folded behind his back. She turned slightly, her voice soft. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "You didn't know me." Jun didn't answer right away. He let the silence sit there, respectfully, as if it deserved room to breathe. Then he said, "Because your silence said more than their noise. And because we don't rise by forgetting our voice, we rise by using it." Danielle swallowed, the words cutting clean. "But all I did was answer a phone." "You did more than that," he replied. "You reminded them that brilliance doesn't come dressed for their comfort. You reminded them that fluency comes in many forms, and that some voices make them uncomfortable because they've only ever heard power in one accent." She blinked, the sting behind her eyes unexpected. "I started in kitchens too," Jun said quietly, leaning against the railing. "First job in the U.S. Dishwasher. I didn't speak a word of English my first year. I watched how people treated those who spoke differently, looked differently. I learned quickly. Some people don't fear difference. They fear being reminded they were never the only kind of smart in the room." Danielle looked down at her hands. "So it was never the Mandarin?" "No," he said. "It was the mirror." The rooftop was silent for a beat. But in that stillness, something shifted inside her. A quiet transformation, not into someone new, but into someone fully seen. Her language wasn't a mistake. It was a bridge. And now, for the first time, she wasn't walking across it alone. Danielle stepped off the plane in Sao Paulo, her badge clipped neatly to her blazer and a translation guide in her bag. Not for her, but for those she met along the way. In her new role, she no longer waited tables under crystal chandeliers. She sat across from startup founders, community organizers, and young entrepreneurs who had been overlooked, underestimated, or told to quiet down. She greeted each in their language: Mandarin, Spanish, English, sometimes Portuguese, and always with the same warmth she once reserved for the smallest moments back at Table 9. Her voice, once suppressed in the name of brand image, now opened doors around the world. At Junjiao's foundation, she became a bridge, connecting cultures, translating more than just words. She translated intent, belonging, value. She spoke with clarity, but carried the weight of silence like memory. In every meeting, in every handshake, she brought the parts of herself that once had to hide, and now they stood front and center. Months passed. Headlines moved on. But back in Manhattan, quiet shifts occurred. Yelp ratings never recovered for the restaurant that had once fired her. Whispers of workplace discrimination lingered long enough that corporate quietly parted ways with Kendra. There was no press release, just absence. One evening, Danielle walked past the restaurant again, not for revenge, but reflection. She stepped through the familiar doors, where the lighting still gleamed and the walls still tried too hard. She didn't stay long, just long enough to find one face she hadn't forgotten, the line cook who, months earlier, had whispered under his breath, "That wasn't right," when no one else had. She caught his eye. He paused, surprised. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said softly. "I speak for more people now, but I haven't forgotten what it means to be silent." He nodded, and for a moment, neither said another word. They didn't need to. As she turned to leave, a phone rang behind the bar. Someone answered it in Spanish. No one flinched. No one scolded. The sound blended with the rhythm of plates, of kitchens moving forward, of small revolutions unfolding quietly. And as Danielle stepped back into the city's night air, the world no longer asked her to shrink. She didn't rise in spite of her voice. She rose because she had finally chosen to use it. They fired her for answering a phone call in her own language, but they couldn't fire the truth she carried, or silence the millions who listened when one voice finally broke through the noise. Danielle didn't shout. She didn't beg. She didn't fight back with anger. She answered with purpose, with fluency, with the quiet conviction of someone who knew that her identity was never something to hide. It was something to honor. In a world that still tries to flatten difference into discomfort, she stood up by simply staying whole. And because she did, doors opened, not just for her, but for those who had been told to wait outside. If this story reminded you that your voice, your culture, your language should never cost you a seat at the table, share it. Because language isn't a barrier. It's a bridge, a memory, a melody, a truth. Follow us for more stories where quiet voices rewrite the rules, and truth speaks every language,